So one of the things that I am kind of warring with when it comes to my deities and looking into myths and things like that is working with deities and talking about myths that are problematic, that have issues. This came up a lot in the beginning of my research into Persephone, where I found out about the fact that she was basically abducted by Hades and how that could feed into her as a goddess, the things that she goes through, the people she protects, some of the things that are important to her. I do find that a lot of her personal ownership, me making a choice to do things, that is very, very important to Persephone as a whole. But also with that, I then worried because part of me felt like that wasn't the whole story. Hades didn't maybe necessarily kidnap her, or maybe he did, but then it grew into something different. I don't maybe it's a little bit of Stockholm Syndrome, I don't know. But it was very different and weird, and it wasn't all just this one-sided story of abduction and she has to go back to him and it's this whole torturous affair. That didn't seem true, but it felt weird if I said, well, I don't think that's the whole story. I think there was some love there. I feel some connection between Persephone and Hades. She seems protective of him. In other myths, she's very defensive of this nymph going after her husband and is like, no, you can't touch him, don't you dare. And out of all of the gods and goddesses and their marriages and many affairs, it seems like Persephone and Hades are the two most stable or committed to each other type of people, which is also very interesting. But that original abduction story does still war with me in a bit. And part of Persephone's first lesson to me was the idea of perception, and how the idea of how everyone else perceives her myth or her story doesn't really matter to her. It's because you're going to make up whatever decision you wish to make up about yourself, about her story. She cannot control it in any way, shape, or form about what you're going to think about it. And so she just kind of lets it go. She knows her own truth, and that's that. But when I'm working with her, I worry at times, am I overcasting on the fact that this horrible thing happened to her? Am I trying to lighten a story that is actually very problematic? Am I trying to wash away the problem part of the fact that Hades did abduct her? Is that an issue? Or is it just kind of accepted that that's part of the mythos, but maybe not to the full story? And I think of this too because it's such a huge part of the mythos that she was abducted. But I wonder about the history of that. How many times, like I've said before, did it get rewritten? Did it get rephrased? And there's a lot of other hidden pieces and things that could lead back to the story that I find very interesting, like how the fact that it was a plant or a piece of food when her mother is the goddess of vegetation, of growth, and she's linked up with that too, that was used to trick her to stay into the underworld. When people say she was tricked in that way, I'm like, she's a goddess of she's the goddess of flowers, of growth. You're telling me she was tricked to the plant. That seems like the one thing she would know a lot about, and if there's a specific plant of the underworld that would make her stay there, I feel like she would know that, right? And also the fact that the pomegranate is kind of known a little bit as a little bit of a fruit of knowledge. There's some tales that say that, I believe if you go through the whole Adam and Eve story within the Bible, that it wasn't an apple that she took from the tree, but it was a pomegranate. The idea that knowledge was the thing that allowed her to go back and forth between the two worlds, and her understanding that, I think it's a very interesting, where suddenly her being this pure victimhood stance where she was abducted entirely doesn't make sense to me. I also wonder a lot about living her life entirely through her mother, the fact that her mother was just trying to basically keep her away from any god or anyone who was interested in Persephone as a wife. She was like, no one can date my daughter, overprotective type of vibe I get from that whole interaction. If that's the case, then this over sheltering, this naivete, and then her kind of maybe branching out on her own, I don't know, there seems to be a lot more layers to it than just she was abducted. But then I do worry, am I casting over things? Am I putting too much of what I wish the story to be onto her story, a way to make it work for me? But then I also wonder too if that's kind of what half these myths are. If there is no way to 100% know for sure what the original tale of Persephone was, then does it really matter if I am not maybe staying true to the myth that she was abducted against her will, or that maybe that abduction didn't turn into something more loving and caring for the relationship later. Because in my interactions with her, in my personal dealings, I don't feel that. I don't feel this resentment or anger or this hatred towards Hades in any way. It definitely feels like a complex relationship between the two of them, but I don't get this resentment at all from Persephone. In fact, if anything, she seems a little doting on him, if, you know, like, yeah, no, that's my husband and I love him, and she seems very independent and free-going. Like, she transfers back and forth all the time between places, and she leaves me and comes back. Like, it's very much I feel her loyalty, but that doesn't mean her presence is put in with her loyalty to me or to anyone I think that she looks over. It's she feels very independent to me, which is interesting, because if she was someone who was a victim in a sense, I almost link a little bit of almost expecting some codependency to come out of that, but I don't sense that at all. I sense this freedom aspect comes along with her. Anyway, so what do you guys think about when you read parts of mythos of your deities and they're very problematic? I mean, I definitely have the same issue with Loki, where I'm looking into some of the stuff he does, or within the myths of Norse mythology and all that. What comes along with that? Like, him instigating trouble versus him, you know, placating the trouble, or like doing this thing to manipulate or whatever. How much of that is problematic and acceptable, or how much of that is, hey, maybe that should be looked at? Or I don't know. It's very interesting to examine like the gods from that veil and go, what do we deem as acceptable? And, you know, is it our place to kind of question that at all? Or is it kind of just beyond us and just a thing that we should use to reflect on our own actions and not worry about what came about with those gods, and just assert our own boundaries with them and go from there, if that makes sense? I don't know, all of that down in the comments below. Anyway, I make new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and I will see you guys next time.